Film series, Standing in Solidarity. My name is Donna Walker-Kuhn, and I'm the Senior Advisor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at New Jersey Performing Arts Center. Welcome, and we're delighted to have you here. In celebration of Asian American Pacific Islanders Month, the ACLU Newark organization has curated an amazing panel for this evening. The title of the conversation is about resilience. And with the continued violence against Asians in America and the ongoing challenges of living in a pandemic, the community has continued to support each other and advance. So this evening, we're going to talk about resilience. I also hope you were able to watch the film, Stop the Hate, the rise in violence against Asian Americans that was provided in your registration link, and is excellent documentary on many of these issues. This social justice series is part of our Standing in Solidarity initiative. The purpose of this series is to bring our community together and to encourage everyone to take part in the movement to ensure civil rights for all. On our website, you can find archived prior social justice panel discussions, as well as resources that will help you take action. We're also very happy to have as our advisors the Newark NAACP, the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, Newark Arts, the Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation Center at Rutgers University, Newark, the Africana Institute at Essex County College, and ACLU Newark. Now, NJPAC would like to offer a land acknowledgement. The language we're using was created with consultation and guidance from Chief Dwayne Perry of the Ramapo Lenape Munsee tribe and Oleana Whispering Dove of the Eastern Salaki Algonquin descendant. We're grateful to them for their generosity, wisdom, and labor to craft these words. We, the Lenape, original benefactors of land once ripened and cultivated with attentiveness to the Creator and her ascendancy, express everlasting gratitude to our Creator for the traditional ancestral jurisdictions of the Munsee, Esopus, Canarsie, Capsee, Werpos, Silvernoy, and Weekasqueak, jointly known today as the Ramapo and Natikato Lenape. We are the Lenape hulking today and will be for the remaining days of tomorrow, keepers of the past. Let this moment of recognition be a monument of action. Let it be the beginning of hope for this, our Turtle Island, and for the Ramapo Lenape, the Munsee people of whose land we now trod. Here on this land, in this place of the Munsee, we acknowledge our debt to those who've come before us, to those who've been denigrated and suffered for the sake of cultural and land appropriation. Let this, our land acknowledgement, be the beginning of a return to unity. Let us be guardians of the water, the air, and the earth, the four-legged, the flyers, the swimmers, the crawlers, the mammal people, and the green. Let us now stand lifting our humanity, enrapturing with Earth's consciousness as guardians of harmony and kindness. I'm pleased to welcome now Gunther Carrero, Scheduling and Asset Optimization Gas Supply of PSEG, Energy Resources and Trade. PSEG has been a tremendous sponsor of our Standing in Solidarity series since we began over 2 years ago, and we're very grateful for their continued support. Gunther, in his position, has a responsibility to lead his team in the formulation and implementation of gas optimization strategies used to procure natural gas, generate off-system sales, optimize over 12 storage and peaking assets, and manage and schedule pipeline capacity across 50 gas contracts and 7 natural gas pipelines. He's also responsible for the scheduling of natural gas for the Long Island Power Authority. Mr. Carrero is involved in several employee business resource groups, including Rise Up, in which he's a member of the benevolence team at Alante and TYPP. He's also president of his local Toastmasters Club. Welcome, Mr. Carrero. Very happy you're here with us this evening.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you for having me. And good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's events. As Donna mentioned, I'm Gunther Carrero, the Manager of Scheduling and Asset Optimization of Gas Supply at PSEG. We are the very proud sponsors of the PSEG True Diversity Film Series. PSEG has been headquartered in Newark for more than a century, and we are thrilled to be a longtime supporter of AAPI. We've been a part of the community that has backed this anchor cultural institution ever since it first opened almost 25 years ago. And the True Diversity Film Series represents the best of that relationship. In fact, in 2021, the PSEG Foundation announced a 2-year pledge to NJPAC for the Standing in Solidarity program, which includes the True Diversity Film Series. This film series is a reflection of PSEG's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion here in Newark, where we are more than just another utility and more than just another company. We are proud of our commitment as citizens of Newark and as citizens of New Jersey. A tremendous part of that commitment is our support for organizations such as NJPAC and what that support means for diversity, for education, and for the arts. During this time of so many renewed conversations around race and justice, PSEG has committed millions of dollars and launched multiple initiatives aimed at ensuring that everyone, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, or religion, is treated equally and equitably in our company, in our community, and in our nation. In order to continue to emphasize the importance of providing support in such areas of critical community need, the PSEG Foundation has realigned its giving strategy under 3 new pillars. 1, environmental sustainability. 2, social justice. And 3, equity and economic empowerment. When one of us is impacted in the community, we all feel the impact. That's why it's essential that we all join together to act and build a framework of equity, compassion, and respect throughout the many diverse communities we represent, which will truly benefit us all. On behalf of PSEG, we believe that our long-standing support for diversity, education, and the arts helps us contribute to that ideal. Now, it is my honor to welcome all of you to this important and timely event on Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Thank you for being here this evening, and please enjoy the discussion. Back to you, Donna.
Thank you so much, Mr. Carrera. So it is now my deep pleasure to welcome our moderator for this evening, Amal Sinha. Amal is a nationally recognized civil rights leader who's dedicated his career to advancing racial justice, holding institutions accountable, and promoting and defending rights and liberties. As executive director of the ACLU of New Jersey, Amal leads a team of dedicated professionals and guides the organization's innovative, integrated advocacy work, utilizing litigation, policy, public education, and strategic communications to build a more equitable society. Amal is actively involved in the South Asian American community, including having served as the president of the South Asian Bar Association of New York, where he led efforts to shape the organization's public interest community and programming. Amal frequently appears in regional, national, and international news outlets as a commentator across many topics, including civil rights and liberties, racial justice, public interest law, and issues facing Asian American and South Asian communities. Welcome, Amal. So happy you're with us this evening.
Thank you so much, Donna, for that very kind introduction. Before I get started, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the context in which this conversation emerges. Just last week, we saw a horrific spate of shootings all across the United States. We saw a shooting in Dallas attacking a Koreatown salon. We saw shootings in Milwaukee, in Houston, in California, and of course, in Buffalo, New York, where somebody with hate in their heart allegedly shot and killed 10 Black community members at a grocery store on Saturday and injured several more. It's in this context that this conversation arises. And I want to take a moment of contemplation or silence to acknowledge the pain and suffering of the victims of all of those hateful and tragic crimes. Thank you. So the theme of tonight's conversation is resilience. And of course, the context that I just described needs to be met with resilience, because it seems as though the hate that we are seeing cuts across so many communities. It's something that is impacting Black community members. It's something that's impacting Asian American community members. It's impacting Jewish community members. There's a rise in anti-Semitism and anti-Islamic bias as well in the United States and here in New Jersey. And it's this hate that is perpetrated by white supremacy and fear and xenophobia that is leaving us divided. And it's important for us to come together and unite around resilience and faith and the idea that we will one day truly be free. So before we get started with our panel, I want to introduce a dear friend of mine, our Acting Attorney General, Matt Platkin. Acting Attorney General Platkin is the 62nd Attorney General of New Jersey, and he assumed the role of Acting Attorney General just in February of this year and is pending Senate confirmation. But prior to becoming Attorney General, General Platkin served as Chief Counsel to Governor Murphy, and where he oversaw an office of attorneys that advised the governor on so many different legal issues and led that team towards advising on legislation, executive orders, administrative laws, regulations, and litigation. And he was responsible for coordinating with the Attorney General's office at that time on all civil matters, including affirmative litigation through that office, and oversaw judicial and prosecutor nominations. After he left the Chief Counsel office, Acting Attorney General Platkin went on to become a partner at the law firm of Lowenstein Sandler, just this year assumed the role of Acting Attorney General. And I'm grateful for his leadership throughout New Jersey and his partnership and collaboration with community groups like the ACLU of New Jersey in order to get good things done for the people of our state. So with that, I'll kick it over to our Acting Attorney General to share a few thoughts.
Thank you, Amol, for that very kind introduction. And thank you to all of the organizers for being here tonight and for putting on this incredibly important event in the middle of course, AAPI Heritage Month, but also, as Amol touched on, in the middle of a particularly difficult period for people of so many communities across our state and frankly, across our country. You mentioned Buffalo and the other incidents we've seen over the past week. And, I'm also reminded, Amol, that we're coming up on the 7-year anniversary of the awful shooting at Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, another incident of racist gun violence in a long list, unfortunately, that is surely too long. When that incident happened, I actually flew down to Charleston and spent the day outside of Mother Emanuel AME Church. And I'll never forget, there was a woman and her son were there, and I was talking, and her son was 8 years old. And she said to me that she brought her son to the church that day so that he could see that love was stronger than hate. And I remember thinking that was such a beautiful thing for someone to do, but also how unfortunate and how wrong it was that we had to even teach 8-year-olds that. And we're having those conversations in too many communities across our state and across our country right now. And the conversation we're having tonight and that you all are coordinating is so important. And I'll touch on in a second why it's important, but I really just want to thank you for inviting me. I want to thank the ACLU for all the work you do. We're fortunate in New Jersey. Amol mentioned our partnership. We have such a strong partnership, not only with organizations throughout the state, but particularly with the ACLU. Believe it or not, this is my 3rd meeting today with the ACLU, so I'm putting our money where our mouth is in that regard. But the partnership is strong, and it's helped us make this state better for so many communities. So thank you for everything you do, Amol, and for your leadership. I mentioned, that this conversation has never been more timely. And while it's so great to be with you, I wish I had better news to report on the state of bias and hate in New Jersey. Just as it is going across the country, we are seeing a unfortunate and dramatic rise in bias and hate incidents in our state. Last month, we released data on reported bias incidents in New Jersey, both for 2020 as well as preliminary data for 2021. And this is data that we make available through the state police every month, so you can see it online. And what we're seeing, I'm sure, will not be surprising to many folks in the audience. We're seeing bias and hate incidents at record levels. 1,871 reported bias incidents in the state of New Jersey last year, the highest number we've had since we've been recording bias incidents starting in 1994. It's a 29% increase over the prior year. And just in the last 6 years alone, reported bias and hate incidents have increased by 400%. And particularly for the AAPI community, again, the numbers bear out what we all know, which is that bias and hate, anti-AAPI bias and hate, is on the rise. Last year, reported incidents affecting the Asian American Pacific Islander community rose 87% over 2020. And the reasons for why, our Division on Civil Rights has done analysis, but the reasons for why is obvious. We've seen a tremendous amount of hateful rhetoric that's propagated on social media, particularly in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic, blaming Asian Americans for the spread of the pandemic. And this rhetoric does not go into a vacuum. As I said, it spreads on social media and people act on it. And as we saw this weekend, in all too dramatic and tragic fashion, people act on it in very violent and deadly ways. And so we are here tonight to talk about some of the work that we're doing. And I'll touch on that in a second, but I just want to commend everyone for your activism and for coming out and support the Asian American community, like every other community in the state, unfortunately, as Amol mentioned, record levels of anti-Black bias, record levels of anti-Semitic activity, anti-Islamic bias and hate activity, anti-LGBTQ or anti-transgender activity, all at record levels. And so particularly for the AAPI community, who has seen such a dramatic increase, it's very important that we remain vigilant and that we come together and try and bring down the stem of violence and by anti-Asian American hate. How we're doing it here in the Department of Law and Public Safety, I want you to know that every incident that gets reported through our various channels, and you can report on bias.njcivilrights.gov, you can report by phone, you can report through law enforcement. Every incident that gets reported within 24 hours is assigned and we thoroughly investigate. If there are charges to be brought as a criminal matter, we will bring them. And all county prosecutors are instructed on that. If there are not criminal charges to be brought because it doesn't reach the burden of proof or because we can't find the perpetrator, we can pursue either civil actions or the reports will inform our policy response. So I want you to know that every report is taken extremely seriously. There's two ways to analyze the increase in bias incidents. One way to think about it, which is a very small piece, is good news. People have more confidence in our reporting systems. People do, particularly in certain communities, do trust that when we get an incident report, we act on it. And so as a result, in certain communities, reporting has increased based on that confidence. But I would be, of course, being disingenuous if I suggested that the entirety of the increase in bias and incident reports in this state or anywhere in the country was due solely to the increased confidence people had in our reporting system. Of course, bias and hate is on the rise here in New Jersey, and it's particularly true for the AAPI community. So in addition to our strong criminal and civil responses, we've improved our state policies on bias crimes to include bias crimes committed against based on gender, disability, and national origin. We've updated, as I said, our standards for prosecuting bias crimes and directed all prosecutors to pursue them vigorously. In December of 2021, we launched a department-wide initiative to use all civil enforcement tools across our departments to address racial injustice throughout the state and racial bias. And just as an example of that, using tools that previously had not been used to combat racial bias, we're now, for instance, using our licensing authority. We license over 700,000 professionals throughout the state. These are doctors and nurses and social workers and hairdressers. We issued a rule that said if you discriminate on the basis of race, gender, or other protected characteristic under our state's law against discrimination, you can lose your license. You can lose your professional license and not be able to practice in the state of New Jersey. So we are putting to bear all resources we have here. And in addition, our Division on Civil Rights has done tremendous work educating and bringing communities together, in addition to investigating bias incidents. They recently hosted an AAPI, or a series of AAPI Stop the Hate webinars. They've done trainings aimed at educating folks on how to respond to bias incidents. They've used all of their other tools at their disposal to raise awareness and, again, bring actions when appropriate. In addition, I want to thank the governor. New Jersey is now the second state in America to require Asian American and Pacific Islander history in our schools. And I know this has become a controversial topic of late, but education is critical to this. And in a state as diverse as New Jersey, and we are among, if not the most diverse states in the nation, and we're also the densest state in the nation. So our communities are right up on top of each other. Teaching each other about different communities, starting when they're young, is very critical. I think about the fact that when I grew up here, went to public school, I didn't have any Asian American history. It wasn't until college that I learned about East Asian and South Asian history, and that shouldn't happen. And the education that we're doing will help reduce, again, the bias and hate that we're seeing. But it's going to take all of our efforts. We know that there's far too much bias and hate out there right now. This weekend and this past week is an all too tragic reminder of that. But these meetings are critically important. I thank the work of all the panelists, and I want you all to know that here at the Department of Law and Public Safety and throughout the state, law enforcement is working to help keep our community safe. We are actively out protecting, whether it be houses of worship or community centers or other places where we know are potential targets. And importantly, we're working very closely with the community on days, I would say blue sky days, but we just went through a near tornado here in Trenton. So on days when we're not dealing with a crisis, because we want communities to come together and get to know each other before there is a moment of crisis, so that they're not sitting across the table from each other in those awful moments and introducing themselves. And that's the hard work that you're doing here, and that's the hard work that we do every day. I thank you for the partnership. I look forward to coming back next year, having much better news to report, but rest assured we are doing everything we can to keep everyone safe and help drive down the bias and hate that's all too prevalent today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, General. I am truly grateful for your leadership and for all of the work that you are doing, that the governor is doing, and everybody else is doing to make sure that we're safe. And I'll point out that I'm very grateful to be a resident of New Jersey, where we have a strong AG's office who is working, hand over hand with community and making sure that we are all aligned when it comes to addressing hate and violence in our communities. And I'm very grateful that we have a strong state constitution that protects the rights of all residents, and we have a strong law against discrimination and a civil rights division that has teeth, that has the ability to address harms that everyday New Jerseyans are facing day in and day out. So thank you so much for your leadership and as you said, putting your money where your mouth is and making sure that we are able to address these terrible things in productive and rational ways.
Thanks, Amol, and thank you for having me.
So with that, I will now open it up to our panelists for the evening and introduce them one by one and ask each of them to say a little bit about where they're coming from and their perspective for tonight's conversation. So first, I wanted to introduce Rose Cuizon-Villazor, who is the interim dean at Rutgers Law School, Newark.
Thank you, Amal, and good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for including me in this important conversation. As Amal mentioned, I am the interim co-dean of Rutgers Law School in Newark. And for tonight's conversation, I would like to focus on how resilience has been demonstrated in history. With the time that I have, I'll walk us back through some key legal cases and points of advocacy in which AAPI individuals became involved in to push for legal and social change. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. I'd like to introduce Gina Moon. Gina is a board member at AAPI Montclair. Gina?
Hi, Amal.
Hi, welcome.
Thanks for that intro. And hi, everyone. My name is Gina Moon, and I'm a corporate attorney in the financial payment space and also a board member of AAPI Montclair, a newly organized nonprofit in Montclair, New Jersey. And I think having the opportunity to recognize the AAPI population and our history during AAPI Heritage Month is so important because I think it's really through education about the AAPI community and our contributions to society that will combat ignorance, racism, and xenophobia. So today I'll share a bit about the Asian American and Pacific Islander community in Montclair and how we found each other and got organized.
Thanks, Gina. Next up is Julie Xu, who's a senior organizer at CAV, Organizing Asian Communities.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Julie Xu. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the senior membership organizer at CAV for our Chinatown Tenants Union. Yeah, I'm excited to be in conversation with everyone here. And what I'd like to share about is our work at CAV on the ground organizing, our few around 35 years of experience now, and some lessons we've learned from being in the work long term, and share about our vision for our community.
Thanks, Julie. Good to have you. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce Jeffreen Uddin, who is the executive director of the Asian American Writers Workshop.
Thanks, Amal. Hi, everyone. Thank you to the organizers for putting this event together. My name is Jeffrey, and I'm the executive director of the Asian American Writers Workshop. We are a national literary nonprofit dedicated to amplifying and publishing Asian and Asian diasporic storytelling. Really excited to be here and planning to talk about the role that the arts and literature and storytelling can play in supporting and empowering our communities.
Wonderful. So I'm looking forward to a rich conversation with all of you. So let's get started. Rose, you are a scholar of migration and of Asian American communities and the history of our communities in the United States. There is a strong theme of resilience against state-based and community-based violence and discrimination against Asian American communities throughout America's history. Could you touch a little bit about that and talk about the key moments in Asian American history where some of that violence or that discrimination was the most palpable, and what some of the legal and political and policy implications of that history may be today?
Yes, thank you. And what I'd like to do is to first provide some context by linking some of the hate crimes, incidents, and violence that the acting attorney general presented with some of our history within the Asian American community. And then after that, I'll highlight just 3 key areas from the law and policy area that showed instances in which AAPI individuals fought back. And then the hope is that the stories that I'll share with you will prompt some conversations together that we might have at the end of our panel discussion. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to share some brief slides with everybody. And here, one of the key themes that I'd like to point out that I believe many of us are aware is that violence against Asian Americans is not new. I'm going to highlight a few things here, such as, for example, in October 1871, we had in Los Angeles, California, a mob of about 500 people attacked Chinese laborers and ended up hanging to death 17 Chinese men. In June 1982, Chinese American Vincent Chin was murdered in Detroit, Michigan, having been mistaken for being Japanese American. Here in our own state in New Jersey, in early fall of 1987, there were several instances of violence against South Asian communities in which, for example, Mr. Patel was beaten with a metal pipe while he was asleep. Dr. Saran was beaten with a baseball bat, and then Mr. Modi was beaten with bricks, and he died days later. As these different hate crimes have shown, there was a key point here of some of the perpetrators who said that they were willing to go to any extreme to get Indians to move out of Jersey City. A couple of years later, a white man fired a semi-automatic rifle at children in Stockton, California, killing 5 Asian American children, ages 6 and 8 years old, who were of Southeast Asian descent. The acting attorney general raised recent examples of violence across that affected various members of different communities. And what I'd like to point out here is the connections between some of those contemporary Asian American, contemporary violence against those different groups with the history that we've seen here, I've presented to you among API communities. And the claim that I'd like to make in my time here is that part of the reason why AAPI communities have been subject to violence is because they have been deemed to be perpetually foreign. And it's that kind of foreignness, the otherness, that many AAPI individuals and communities have fought back and showed resilience and strength in order to argue for inclusion, belonging, and equality. Through key points, through 3 different lenses: immigration, property, and citizenship, both through federal and state laws. These 3 areas present opportunities for exclusion, but also for fighting back among AAPI individuals. And so to begin with immigration, there were at least 3 different federal laws passed in 1875, in 1882, and then later in 1917. These three laws, but there were other laws that were passed along and in between these laws. These were designed to racially exclude first Chinese women in 1875, expanded to all Chinese in 1882, and then to all other Asian immigrants in 1917. Immigration therefore worked as a platform for racially excluding immigrants from Asia from coming to the United States. But there were Asian Americans who were already in the United States who fought back. And one of those was Che Chang-ping. And here, although he lost in 1889, the Che Chang-ping launched a community of efforts to fight back against all of these different racially exclusionary immigration laws. And so while in Che Chang-ping, the Supreme Court said that foreigners of a different race in this country who will not assimilate with us to be dangerous to peace and security and may be excluded, ultimately through the work of AAPI individuals by 1965, Congress was able to pass to pass legislation that removed all race-based and national origin barriers to immigration law. But immigration law was not the only area of law that served to exclude AAPI individuals, but also led to AAPI communities fighting back and showing resilience. The other area of law is citizenship laws. I will highlight at this point birthright citizenship, which became a site for ongoing denial of US citizenship despite Asian Americans being born in the United States. Through litigation advocacy and community organizing, AAPI individuals fought for inclusion. The key case here is Wong Kim Ark versus United States in 1898, in which here Wong Kim Ark was born in California, and yet he was deemed to be a foreigner initially by immigration officers. And he and community members fought back and brought a case all the way up to the US Supreme Court and obtained a key legal opinion that said that once a person is born in, if a person is born in the United States, that person is considered to be a US citizen. And that is an important point for today's ongoing law, that the 14th Amendment provides citizenship for all those persons who are born in the United States, regardless of parent citizenship. And so there were at least two other cases that in which Asian Americans fought back and showed that they desired membership and belonging. And those cases are featured here: Ozawa versus United States and Thin versus United States. Although these two cases led to the court declaring that these Asian Americans were not entitled to naturalize to become US citizens. These two cases, just like the immigration cases that I explained earlier, also led to opportunities for AAPI communities to fight back, such that by 1952, AAPI communities and their allies led to the passage of the 1952 immigration law that abolished racial restrictions in applying for citizenship. Lastly, alien land laws were also another area of laws that were used by states to deny membership to Asian American and Pacific Islander communities and individuals. And here, this state laws, there were property laws, relied on federal immigration and citizenship laws to exclude AAPI individuals from owning property. Fred Oyama from California fought back against the racial exclusion from property ownership and won in the US Supreme Court in 1948. And in doing so, he and his case was able to provide an important precedent for ultimately providing access to access to property ownership in that were later on enjoyed by African Americans and other people of color. So in sum, through immigration, property, and citizenship laws, federal and state laws, state governments sought to remove, exclude, and deny from membership Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And yet, and these laws led to the stereotype of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders as perpetual foreigners. But AAPI individuals and communities fought back, demonstrating resilience and sought to effect social and legal change. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Rose, for that thorough lesson and education in our history. You know, I've always been fascinated by the naturalization cases, Ozawa and Fend, because it was in those cases that the Supreme Court of the United States sort of manipulated definitions of what is what it means to be white in the United States when you know, it was during a time when naturalized citizenship was reserved only for free white persons. And in Ozawa, who claimed that he was, you know, by plain meaning, whiter than most other US-born Americans, you know, the Supreme Court said, no, that's not what we mean by white. We mean this, like, you know, anthropologically defined group. And when Finn said the same thing, that he was white by the definition of anthropologically defined because he came from the high caste in India and therefore is of the superior race, an argument that I don't agree with, but he said it, and he was told, no, what we mean is the common man's understanding or the popular understanding of what it means to be white, which is to say, you know, we get to decide, this group of white men on the Supreme Court, who it is that is able to benefit from the definition of white in the United States. So it's always been color related and race related, and something that has been at the exclusion of our communities, even though our communities, as you've so aptly described, have been here for hundreds of years. And it wasn't until 3 decades later that that was resolved, right? And which reminds me that had my father come into this country just in the prior decade, he would not have been eligible for naturalized citizenship.
Yeah, that's right.
yeah.
So I mean, there's so much here. I know in the slides that I've shown, like I had to just give an overview of some of the key points that I wanted to highlight for today. But one thing that you just said, I think it's important for us to remember the Supreme Court in 1922 and in other parts of US history played a critical role in shaping race relations and racial hierarchy. And one of the things that we need to pay attention to today is the role that the Supreme Court will continue, how the Supreme Court will continue to shape race relations, right, and gender rights, and the rights of women, rights of immigrants, and that's in terms of the work that we need to do for advocating for social and legal change, not only for AAPI individuals, but for our other communities that we care about. We need to continue. It's important to pay attention to the Supreme Court's role.
Thanks so much, Rose. I want to turn to Gina. Gina, you are a board member of AAPI Montclair, which formed in the wake of all of the increase in violence over the past couple of years against Asian American communities. Could you tell us a little bit about why AAPI Montclair formed, and what its goals are, and how other communities might be able to learn from AAPI Montclair, and what we should be achieving in terms of mobilization and grassroots engagement?
Sure. So AAPI Montclair formed shortly after the Atlanta murders last year, when a group of concerned AAPI parents and parents of AAPI children in Montclair started sharing their concerns and worries in a local parent Facebook group. At this time, we were about a year into the pandemic and had also just gone through our first year of experiencing an alarming growth of anti-Asian hate crimes. So when schools started discussing opening up again, many parents were naturally concerned for their AAPI children and started sharing about the racism their children faced in local schools. Now, Montclair is a diverse and progressive town, and more than a few parents shared with me that they specifically chose Montclair for its diversity. But even Montclair was not immune. Story after story was shared, and some examples of the racism our children experienced were of other students mocking an Asian language over a Zoom class while teachers did nothing and ignored the incident. Or having other students ask them if they carried the China virus, or teachers shaming students who brought lunches with Asian foods while other students ostracized them in the lunchroom. There was also an instance of a teacher who consistently mixed up the names of 2 Asian students in her class the entire school year. These are just the tip of the iceberg, and upon seeing all these stories being shared on the parent group, a few concerned parents got together to discuss our shared concerns and what actions we could take before schools reopened. What resulted was an open letter to the school district with specific steps that schools could take to help ensure the return to school is a safe and welcoming experience for all children. And one of our requests was to encourage our school leaders to educate on the different forms racism and microaggressions can take, many of which are not always recognized as the product of racial bias. And another request was to have administrators encourage all parents to have discussions about racism and xenophobia with their children prior to returning to school, and to share resources to support parents in these discussions. We published this letter in local Facebook groups and collected donations to buy a full-page ad in the local newspaper to publish the letter. We collected over 400 local signatures in a matter of days and had 8 AAPI community members join the next school board meeting to voice our concerns. From there, we got regular meetings scheduled with the superintendent and received his support, and schools in our district started to implement the requests we laid out in varying degrees. Shortly afterwards, under the leadership of the group's founding members, we organized a number of community events. The first one being the Lantern Festival, which was held to remember the victims of racism and violence. And that has already been a year ago. And our second Lantern Festival is actually scheduled for this Friday at Edgemont Park in Montclair. If anyone is interested in meeting some of our community members, you're very welcome to join. And the organization also hosted a Lunar New Year festival, a Diwali celebration, and numerous other cultural and community building events that were attended by thousands of people. One of the most impactful parts of all of this for me was that my children were able to see very visibly an entire community of people who look like them and see different Asian cultures being celebrated in a very visible and joyous way in our town. It really meant a lot to see my daughter attend the Lunar New Year festival wearing a hanbok, and for her to see other Korean and Korean American women wearing hanboks around her. And we've heard from so many other parents of AAPI children tell us how much it means to them that they have an opportunity to bring their children to these events. In addition to the events, we also develop strong education and advocacy committees to not only support local issues, but also partner with organizations like Make Us Visible to support broader statewide issues such as the AAPI curriculum bill, which was mentioned earlier. This bill advocated for Asian American and Pacific Islander inclusion in the K-12 curriculum in New Jersey public schools and was passed by the New Jersey Senate and Assembly in late 2021. We shared speaking notes and facts about this bill and asked our community members to reach out to their representatives and share the disturbing state of affairs. Like how in New Jersey alone, nearly 25% of reported bias incidents against AAPI individuals happen in K-12 schools, which is more than in any other location. Our message was that we believe it's vital to focus on prevention and education by emphasizing what an integral part of this country and state Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders have been and continue to be. About a few months ago, we officially organized as a nonprofit, and many of the founding members and organizers of the initial work streams are now board members and committee leaders of AAPI Montclair. The other very impactful part of this organization has been a sense of unity. When things happen that impact our community and its members, there is a group that I and other individuals can go to voice our concerns and develop a plan of action to tackle an issue. For example, we've unfortunately had several instances of community members sharing harassment, racism, or xenophobia that they have experienced in our town or in neighboring towns. And our advocacy committee's response has ranged from launching a Stop Asian Hate sticker campaign to distribute window stickers to businesses across Montclair, to reaching out to the local police department to investigate a local member of this department who allegedly made racist anti-Asian comments on a public forum. Just knowing that there is a community that will be there to provide solidarity and support has been incredible and brought me a sense of calm and control during a time when I felt very anxious and lonely. As for organizing, I think the first step is you need to find each other. So many AAPI members have said they never knew this many Asians lived in Montclair. Most of the board members have not met each other until this organization formed. So if there's a local Facebook group or other type of group that's town-wide, I think those are good initial resources to find other like-minded individuals. And from there, you need to determine what the common goals and needs are, what concerns and issues you share, and develop a workable strategy that draws in everyone's strengths. We started very small. The letter was drafted by a handful of concerned parents, and only 8 parents showed up to the Board of Education meeting to voice our concerns. And that was enough to get regular meetings scheduled with the superintendent to create an action plan to address our concerns. For the AAPI curriculum bill, only 5 members of the AAPI community spoke before the New Jersey Senate, and that was enough to help pass this bill. This past year was full of trauma, but it's also shown our larger community that there's great power in coming together and uniting over common causes. And I think balancing some of that heavier work, like what we do in advocacy and education, which can bring with it an emotional toll, with community-wide celebrations that bring us happiness and joy, is what really helps make this organization sustainable. I'm really hopeful that we'll see more and more AAPI folks find each other and form communities and organizations or organize grassroots efforts to provide support and advocacy for each other and for our larger community. I'll hand it back over to you now, Amol.
Thanks so much, Gina. What you're describing is so remarkable, right? Like you're working at the intersection of culture and education and really political empowerment, right? And you're building political power across Asian American communities in New Jersey, well, specifically in Montclair, but in New Jersey, Asian American communities make up about 10% of our population. And what we don't see is the sort of attention, political attention given to our communities the way other communities may see, and that's really important. We are about over 900,000 people in New Jersey, and you wouldn't know it by seeing the representation at every level of government in New Jersey. Of course, some of that has increased over time. We now have 6 members of our legislature who identify, state legislature who identify as AAPI. We have 1 Congress member who identifies as Asian American. We have several school board members and town council members and county commissioners, but it's certainly nowhere near representation, right? It's not representative of the amount of our population. So, kudos to AAPI Montclair for making AAPI communities visible and in all the work that you're doing.
Thanks, Mo.
Julie, I wanted to turn to you now to talk about the work that you're doing at CAV. You're a senior organizer at CAV, organizing Chinatown tenants, and I wanted to ask you about the work that you've been doing in New York. And how CAV, first of all, what CAV does, and its model of organizing, and how CAV addresses the wide socioeconomic diversity of Asian American communities, and what it does to uplift those working class community members that we have in Asian American society in the United States, and to describe a little bit about CAV's mission. And what the needs are going forward in organizing our communities.
Yeah, thanks, Amal. Hello, everyone. I'm coming today speaking from Brooklyn. So a little bit different, and my work is in Chinatown, but I believe some of these lessons might be useful to anyone who is interested in organizing Asian American folks. CAV is an organization that was founded in 1986 by working class Asian women to combat anti-Asian violence. And it's been many things through the years. We've organized home care workers, we've organized taxi drivers, street vendors, and we fought against police brutality. And we've also, in the wake of 9/11, organized against the surveillance and the heightened policing that happened. And through the years, our organizing strategy has also shifted, as you think it might, to respond to shifting conditions. We've moved from individual instances, combating individual instances of violence. Seeing how that was really difficult to see results, or to really feel like the justice that was served was justice like that should have happened. I think those fights were really taxing on organizers, and they were really difficult. And in our latest iteration of organizing, we've focused more on systemic violence. And so right now, our organizing is focused on housing, and we organize in Chinatown, we organize in Queens, and we develop the leadership of working class Asian immigrants. So our members they're Chinese, Korean, Bangladeshi, some are in rent stabilized housing, some are in market rate housing, some are public housing tenants. But right now we see in New York, and I'm sure, and all across the country, that a lot of housing is really difficult for folks to stay in. Places that our members have lived in for 20, 30 years are becoming unaffordable. Conditions are worsening, and people are getting pushed out. So I think when we think about violence, it also extends further than maybe the individual instances we've been seeing highlighted in the news, right? And systemic violence. When we think about housing, it's also gender violence, and I've met like many members, right? The ways that, women have to rely on relationships for housing, but maybe they're not safe. And it's really, I think, what we think about and struggle over and are constantly trying to understand and enact our vision of is safety. And safety means many different things. And it can be many different things, but we really want to create a space and a place for people to fully, be human. And I think it's really difficult, especially now when a lot of humanity is like under attack. And I think our members also constantly hear, because they're working class tenants, they're immigrants, some are newer immigrants, some are older immigrants, but many times there were conditions in their home countries, and they fled. And it was very difficult to come to the US and completely foreign. And we hear a lot that they think that their voices don't matter because they don't know English, that they haven't had formal education. And that's what we're really trying to create we believe that relationships have the ability to transform people. And we're really interested in developing leadership of the working class because we believe that they have the power and they should have the power and they deserve to have the power, to defend their neighborhoods. Like right now, some of our big fights are against luxury towers in Chinatown. And throughout the pandemic, some of our rapid response actually has been around eviction defense. And those are really difficult. Housing court in New York right now is ridiculous and horrible. People are getting pushed through. They're supposed to have lawyers, but there's not enough lawyers. But the courts are still pushing people through on these eviction cases. And there's often language barriers. And I think I can talk a lot more about different things. Amal, I don't know if I missed anything, but I think it's hard, and this moment is hard. But at the same time, right, it's also when things are hard that it reveals like who you are and your values. And I think what our organization has been thinking about a lot too is in these like heightened moments of visibility on anti-Asian violence, how can we react with urgency to the moment, but stay grounded in our values, right? And how can we maybe push back against some of the carceral solutions that have been offered, because we've been trying those for a long time, and maybe give something else a chance because we see that it's not actually making our people safer. So I'll leave it there. Any follow-up?
I want to lift up two things that you said, Julie. First, describing the socioeconomic diversity of the people that you work with is really important. I think the model minority myth in our society has done a lot of damage, and one of the things that it has done is that it has assumed privilege for our communities, which oftentimes is not the case. There are many, including in New Jersey. I know you're describing New York, but including in New Jersey, there are many areas where we have communities of Asian Americans that are lacking privilege, that do not have access to their fundamentals met. They are, working poor and are struggling to get by. Asian Americans also have increased language barriers, like you described. There's also, they're also one of the biggest groups of undocumented folks in our state, and that's really important to recognize, because those are all challenges and obstacles that our community faces, and those are the trigger points of violence against our communities. And so I want to lift that up. And another thing that you mentioned was about the carceral solutions that we oftentimes have to violence. It's, policing has been central to American society for hundreds of years, yet we have still seen increased crime. We have still seen increased attacks and bias. So we have to try something different. So maybe policing isn't working, and maybe throwing more money at police in the face of increased attacks on Asian American communities isn't the right solution. And we have to rethink and reimagine how we approach these issues in order to find the right solution and not just something that we're comfortable with.
Yeah.
And I'll point out one more thing. I know that a lot of folks have been, Rose, you talked about the Supreme Court, and a lot of folks have been hearing about the leaked abortion decision from the Supreme Court and how that is going to impact women's rights and people who get pregnant, their rights going forward. I'll note that it will have an impact on Asian American communities as well. And that's something that I think our communities oftentimes are reluctant to grapple with. If folks will recall, there was a South Asian woman in Ireland who was denied where abortion at the time was banned, and was denied the care that she needed in order to save her life. And she died as a result just a couple of years ago. And there was the story of Purvi Patel, who was charged with crimes after having a miscarriage when she wasn't able to seek the abortion care that she needed because of both legal, systemic, and cultural constraints in her life. And those are all things that I want to lift up in this space, because every aspect of American life and rights impacts our communities as well, and sometimes disproportionately so. And I want to make sure that people remember that as we go forward. Thank you, Julie, for everything that you're doing and everything that CAV is doing. Jeffrey, I wanted to turn to you now to talk a little bit about the Asian American Writers Workshop, and really to talk about the use of resilience in arts and literature and the need for Asian American storytelling. So could you tell us a little bit about how you see Asian American storytelling as an important part of responding to violence and promoting resilience?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Thank you again, Amol, for having us here for this important conversation. The Asian American Writers Workshop, for people that might not be familiar with the organization, is a national nonprofit founded in 1991, dedicated to amplifying and publishing Asian and Asian diasporic storytelling. We have a pretty robust lineup of offerings. We host about 50 public events every year. We have one of the most active reading and event series in the country. We have 2 fellowship programs that materially support emerging writers in early stages of their career. We host community workshops where we place teaching artists in high schools and senior centers throughout New York City. And we also have a digital magazine, an award-winning digital magazine called The Margins, where we publish new and original work, multi-genre. We publish everything from fiction to poetry to essays to interviews, and really use it as a platform to showcase some of the best and the brightest work by Asian storytellers out there. So we really work with writers at every stage of their career, whether they're a baby writer coming to our workshop or a best-selling novelist coming to speak at an event. But our community includes readers also. And I think that's the important thing about the arts and literature. It's as much of a source of solace for the artist as it is for the audience. And we have seen that in the past couple of years with everybody at home. We've actually been operating remotely and pivoted to digital programming, and our audience numbers have gone up. And I think there's a real hunger, as there always is during times of crisis, for the role of storytelling and the role of artistry. But there are a few things that kind of inform our work as a group that focuses on Asian American storytellers that I just want to mention for tonight's conversation. First is just the complexity of the term Asian American. Words are complicated and definitions are even more complicated. Asian American covers over 20 different countries and dozens of languages and dozens of regional communities. And, we touched on the socioeconomic diversity, but there's also cultural diversity and religious diversity. And, the levels of regionalism can go, as intricately as you might imagine. And even, we mentioned kind of the undocumented members of our community. What does it mean when your identity includes the word American? And so many of your community members are legally not American. What does that mean, right? But all to say, there is no one Asian American experience. So when people think about what is represented in the arts and the literature, there's no great Asian American novel that can exist because there's no one type of Asian American experience. So what we think about at the workshop often and frequently is this idea of narrative plenitude, because representation is just a buzzword if there's only one of us. And that's what ends up happening a lot of times. There's room for one brown author. There's room for one Asian-centric television show. And by, it's just the first step. And I think without a multitude of representations, without multiple stories being put out there, the representation it's shallow and it's not, it ends up embracing a scarcity mindset that actually marginalizes portions of our own community. So something that we think often about at the workshop is creating platforms and creating opportunities for as many stories as possible to be out there. What are we doing to help support our writers in an industry that is as opaque and has as many gatekeepers as the publishing industry does? What are we doing to help amplify the stories that are out there to make sure they are getting the widest audience possible? The more stories that are out there, the truer the representation actually is. And so that is something that we work on and focus on pretty heavily at the workshop. And also, the arts are a bomb. And I think more than anything, as we've seen in the past couple of years, storytellers are the emissaries of our times, and they have been and will continue to be the ones that put words to the experiences that we're all going through and help us all kind of understand things a little bit better.
Thanks so much, Shafreen. I just want to put in a plug for the Asian American Writers Workshop because for several years when I was struggling to understand my father's passing and what it meant for his life and my own story and my own journey, I decided to take writing courses through the Asian American Writers Workshop, and it really helped me put pen to paper for myself and understand and process something that happened in my life that wasn't captured in any other any book that I read or any movie that I watched. Asian American grief is particularly unique because of cultural implications of things, balancing two cultures, being the first in our society to sort of to, at least in my community, my father passing was the first person in our community to go, and it was really just new to me and my family on figuring out how to grieve and making sure that we are staying true to all aspects of our culture. And so the Asian American Writers Workshop helped me process the ideas that surfaced and the thoughts that surfaced when I was there. And it was so wonderful to be in a community of people whose cultures may not have been my own, but they were coming from a perspective of their own and suffered through or experienced the same alienation and uniqueness that I did. So I really deeply appreciate the Asian American Writers Workshop, not just for lifting up writers and creating a platform for people, but also helping us introspect in the right ways. I wanted to let the audience know that if you have any questions for us, please feel free to put it in the chat or in the Q&A. We will certainly address them, and you can certainly voice your questions in either of those written forum. I wanted to ask one open-ended question to the whole group, which is really a two-part question. So it's two questions. One is, there is a narrative out there that that suggests that communities should not be united. There are oftentimes attempts at division between Asian American communities, Black communities, Muslim communities, Latinx communities, and we are each seen through a lens of the problems that people think impact our communities the most, whether it's immigration in Latinx communities, or education in Asian American communities, or crime and Black communities, and policing in Black communities. So these are national security and Muslim communities. Like, these are silos that we have been placed in, not by our own doing, but by the powers that be, and we have been isolated as a result. What can we do to stand in solidarity with one another, and why is that important? And I guess the second part of my question is, relatedly, what can the average listener or viewer do to get more involved in their community in standing up for Asian American communities and practicing that resilience that we're talking about? Rose, please, I see your hand.
Thank you. I'd like to address the solidarity part. I think it is essential that we as Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders continue to work alongside with other groups in order to push for social and legal change. That has been a model, that collaborative intersectionality model is we've seen that work throughout history, and that's the kind of engagement that we're seeing today that is needed. It doesn't mean that it's easy, right? And we also have to avoid talking about who had it worse, because that's not helpful. Instead, what we need to do is look, at least in my view, is to see what are the root causes of subordination that we're seeing, and what can we do together to address that. And so I have no doubt in my mind that solidarity and allyship, as difficult as that is needed in order to move forward and create the change that we want to create socially and also legally and culturally too.
Thanks, Rose. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll just add, this idea of cross-racial solidarity isn't new. And I think that's also important in that, the immigration laws that exist, I mean, that's a direct consequence of the Civil Rights Act, right? Black and Asian communities have been working together for decades and have been most successful in building political power when they do work together. One project that we started at the workshop that I'm really proud of is the Black and Asian Feminist Solidarities Project. It's an editorial platform meant to amplify work by two groups, Black Women Radicals and the Asian American Feminist Collective. And it's a monthly editorial publishing that we do in our magazine that tells stories of the historical frameworks of feminist organizing by Black and Asian communities. And so it's using our past and our history to help inform the future and imagine a future that is more just and is more equitable. So I definitely, a big part of kind of moving forward in cross-racial solidarity is also understanding and acknowledging the history behind it, because there is a lot of it, and it's what helps kind of inform our future. In terms of what people can do kind of moving forward. As an arts organization, we believe that joy can be subversive, and there's real action in embracing joy. So to that end, I actually want to steal some words from Ocean Vuong, a poet, who recently said, let no one mistake us for the fruit of violence, but rather that violence, having passed through the fruit, failed to spoil it. And I think just embracing joy and embracing joy within our communities is subversive and a revolutionary act in itself.
Thanks, Jeffrey, and thanks for those powerful words. Julie or Gina, any other thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So I just wanted to share, just seeing what we were able to do when a handful of AAPI community members joined together and organized really underlines for me that there's just so much more that we can achieve if we partner with and support other communities as well. And from an organizational perspective, this is definitely something we thought about within AAPI Montclair. And some of the examples of the ways we've tried to build this solidarity is by having an AAPI board member and student member join the Montclair Civil Rights Commission, supporting the Montclair Juneteenth celebration last year through volunteers and a monetary donation. And we were also the first Asian American group to join the Reparations for Slavery campaign with the New Jersey Institute of Social Justice. And we shared our history as Japanese Americans who achieved reparations. And it was important for us to connect our history to show what was possible, because oftentimes reparations is criticized as a lofty ideal. And the last example that pops to mind is in light of the horrifying anti-Black mass shooting in Buffalo a few days ago, we're now working to build in more faith leaders from our community into the Lantern Festival program. So of course, how we build the solidarity will vary across towns and situations and organizations, but I think it's critical that we all make a conscious effort on a collective level to identify how we can meaningfully support the Black American community and other marginalized communities, because if one of us doesn't progress, then none of us truly will.
Well said. Julie, any other thoughts on that question?
Hello, okay. My Wi-Fi went out for a little bit. I think nothing new. Yeah, I think it's been showing up for each other. I think in our experience, there are many points of connection, multiracial, ethnically, and like the work of tenants. We see a lot of our Chinese tenants working with other tenants, and as workers, there are points of, connection and shared experience that are also important to draw on. And so showing up for, construction workers, because our members are also construction workers, has been, I think, really beautiful way to build multiracially. And for those wanting guidance in the moment, I think it's to, get involved, see what's out there, see what you can do. I think I'm also gonna bring in a paraphrase quote, but Grace Lee Boggs, whose life and work was so, representative of how to build and how to live a life that is building like a future. She said, there's no final struggle, right? Only new contradictions, new, more complex questions, and that we have to be like the leaders we want to see. And so that really is an invitation for everyone.
Thanks, Julie. So we have a couple of audience questions. So I'm going to ask this one, which bear with me, it's a little long. It says, Heidi asks, how can we transmute trauma-centered narratives of our experience and history as Asian Americans and move towards joy, compassion, and positivity as essential components of collective healing and reinvention for our community? Is this important? What are your thoughts? And I think I want to start with Jeffrey on that, because you talked about joy as a subversive act.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big piece of that is going back to this idea of narrative plenitude. A lot of times, our writers or our storytellers end up being defined by their trauma and defined by their oppression. And I think a big piece of that is when we're stuck in this scarcity mindset of there can only be one. If there can only be one South Asian writer, then that story is going to have to be about partition or something like that, right? But if we are doing our part in putting as many stories out there, because you can't deny the oppression, you can't deny the trauma either. It's a part of our history. It's a part of our present. It's still happening. The violence is there. You can't get away from that. But to be in a position where it's not the only story of yours being told, is just to have more stories out there. And that's, you know, what we're trying to do at the workshop, in just empowering as many storytellers as possible.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? So this next question from Joanne asks, what would be a good way to bring the different Asian, Southeast Asian groups to the same table to work together? And I think that, you know, is, I'll add to that. Right? There are a lot of identity politics in our own communities. You know, those identity politics oftentimes relate to what religion you are, what part, I could speak to the Indian American community, what part of India you may have migrated from, what language you speak, and believe it or not, caste has a lot to do with where your social status might fall in the United States as well. And there is caste discrimination in the United States. And you know, but of course, and it also, you know, when you came to the United States, when your family came to the United States, there's a lot of identity around that. Are you somebody who is a recent immigrant, or are you somebody whose family has been here for multiple generations? And that is, those are all sort of intersections of how we sort of, you know, create a hierarchy even amongst Asian American, South Asian, East Asian communities, and something to note. So what's a good way to bring together all of these diverse perspectives to the table to work together? And if I can, I want to ask Gina, because you gave us an example of AAPI Montclair that did just that, right? Where you brought together so many different folks who didn't realize that they were all in the same community, and that they could have a voice. And so there's an importance in, you know, that diversity, but there's also an importance in collective voice.
Sure. So, you know, like, I mean, we're all aware that there's just so many different types of Asians, and our cultures and specific interests and needs will of course vary, but I think the key is to focus on the collective goals of the larger Asian community. And, you know, just it's not always just thinking about the issues that our own specific individual group could benefit from if those issues are addressed, but also having members of each group think thoughtfully about how we can help support and contribute to other groups as well. And I think maybe a part of it is also the scarcity mindset that was referenced earlier, but I think that's just, it's really important for us to kind of break that narrative down. And just, if you look at how much more can be accomplished if you work together, and again, focus on what the common interests are, I think that could be potentially a good starting point, but it's a very large question, so I don't know if I adequately addressed it.
Thank you, Gina. Jeffrey?
I just wanted to add, I think multiple things can be true at the same time, and especially of this idea of bringing together kind of the different communities within the Asian American community. You know, looking at kind of the history of the the term Asian American. It's a new term. It's from the 60s or 70s when college students were recognizing that there was political power to be built in this kind of pan-Asian umbrella term. It ultimately ending up in Asian American studies departments being added into universities across the country, right? So there are moments when the pan-Asian umbrella term is useful in building political power, in, you know, the power of numbers, collective, community, etc. But that doesn't diminish from the individual communities within it. And I think that that context and that nuance gets lost sometimes just in how like the media is, and you know, everything is really flattened these days, and social media has a big part in that, right? Of like, there's no room for nuance. But I think nuance is what helps uplift all of the different communities within the Asian American community. And I had another thought that just left my brain, so maybe I'll come back to it. But that was the first piece of it.
Thanks, Jeffrey. So I'm going to ask, we're running out of time here, so I'm going to ask one last question for each of our panelists. And it was actually a question that I had in my script, and also a version of which Jeffrey is asking in the chat, which is, this has been a difficult few years. What are you each most hopeful for? And can I start with Rose?
I think this is where I want to bring us back to the theme of tonight's talk, and that is resilience. And that resilience, we will continue to find a way to find strength within the conflicts and the tensions and the hate that we're experiencing, and connect that theme of resilience to something that Jeffrey said about joy. I'm hopeful that we are able to not only find strength, but also be able to celebrate together, celebrate the good that we're seeing. It's easy to forget that there are positive things around us when there are so many other awful things that are happening to members of our community and to others too. But we must, part of resilience here, I think, is what Jeffrey was saying about celebrating and finding joy.
Thanks, Rose. Julie, what gives you hope?
Yeah, I think something I forgot to mention earlier was that we also have some incredible youth leaders, young leaders, and we've recently, in our leadership, we call them the organizing committee, but have brought together our youth leaders with our older tenant leaders to form intergenerational leadership body. There's also bilingual. And I think seeing those relationships and that multi-generational, multilingual coming together regularly, how they can push each other and you know, agitate each other to grow. I think seeing those relationships, seeing change, seeing growth really gives me hope. And all the new people, you know, joining the movement, being politicized by the moment, I think that also gives me great hope.
Thanks, Julie. Gina, what are you hopeful for?
So I think that the last 2 or so years was really difficult for a lot of us because of the huge increase in hate and bias our community faced, but something really positive also came from that. I don't think AAPI Montclair members would have found each other and organized the way we did if we hadn't all suffered collectively when COVID started. So I'm hopeful that we'll see more and more AAPI communities find each other and organize, because out of all of this darkness, we've seen that there is a lot of power to be found when we unify and support each other.
Thanks, Gina. And Jeffreen, what are you hopeful for?
I'm going to actually steal both Julie and Gina and Jenna's answers and combine them, because I am hopeful about young people who really fearlessly embrace the power of the collective, and especially in the AAPI community. Thinking back at the beginning of the COVID pandemic in New York City, I think every borough's mutual aid program was led by a young Asian woman. And that's not a coincidence. It's our young people, our women are fearless and brave and inspiring. And if we follow their lead, I feel like we'll be in a good place.
Thanks, Jeffreen. And I'll close by sharing what gives me hope, which is this community and the intersectionality of our work. We have an unjust racial hierarchy in this country, and it's existed since the founding of our country, and it's been the source of much pain and also the source of much advocacy and resilience. I think it's our job to disrupt it whenever we can. And oftentimes as Asian American communities, as my friend Deepa Iyer says, we have a choice of whether or not to accept the racial bribe. And I think it's our job to reject the racial bribe and disrupt that racial hierarchy that exists in the country. Oftentimes when I speak to Asian American or audiences, especially South Asian audiences, I share that, there are among us people who are simultaneously privileged and oppressed. And we have to carry that nuance. We have to be able to speak to both things, because we can't allow, our dose of privilege to cancel out our dose of oppression and therefore be rendered invisible. And just because we may not be the most privileged nor the most oppressed does not mean that we don't have a voice. And we need to make sure that we are using our privilege to advocate for communities who don't have as much. And we are using our oppression to fuel our motivation to advocate for ourselves. So that balance gives me a little bit of hope, that I know that there are actors out there in our communities that are disrupting the racial hierarchy, that are utilizing their privilege for good, and that they are advocating for each one of us. So thank you so much to all of our panelists. Thank you to Acting Attorney General Matt Platkin for joining us. Thank you so much to Gunther and PSEG for this program. And thank you, of course, to our friends at NJPAC, and in particular, Kitab Rollins, and Donna Walker-Kuhn, the person who made the magic happen. And I will turn it back over to Donna. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much. This was such an important conversation. And, this was actually a continuation of the discussion we started last year when we saw the violence against the Asian American community in Atlanta. So we will continue to explore these topics and discuss ways that we can stand in solidarity together. I really appreciate the hope that each of you gave. We're going to hold on to that. So thank you for that. So thank you, Amal, for just moderating this in such an important way. And of course, our deep appreciation to the Acting Attorney General. I'd also like to thank our audience. Thank you for staying with us and asking these important questions. We really appreciate the interest that both our panel and audiences show in the social justice topics. We will continue programming social justice topics so that we can disrupt all that creates, this kind of disunity that we experience. So next month, please join us. Our Standing on Solidarity panel will be focused on Juneteenth. Specifically, we're going to talk about Black wealth, and it's going to be on Monday, June 13th. And we look forward to seeing all of you then. Until then, have a wonderful evening, and thank you so much.